Okay, so this is part two of how sustainable is rapid economic development. Part one was ended shortly because my computer died. So computer is back up and running and we're good to go. In this section, we're going to look at how has China reduced air pollution. And since that BBC video was made, as a result of protests by the Chinese people, the Chinese government took steps to reduce the amount of air pollution in China. And those steps are on the board on the flow diagram. Pause the video and read through the flow diagram. Right, so they started closing coal power stations and replacing them with renewable energy. That's mainly solar with some wind as well. They forced polluting factories to close, and they also developed an app so that people could report big polluters. So on your phone, you could say to the government, look, this is a factory. They're causing a lot of pollution. Please come and check them out and make sure that they don't cause as much pollution. And the Chinese government needed to pay for all this. So what they actually did was increase taxes for businesses. Remember that businesses in China, particularly in special economic zones, pay very low taxes. So this was quite radical. But they did increase taxes because they realised that air pollution was a major problem. Here is a graph of air pollution in Beijing. Tell your screen what has happened to the amount of air pollution from 2013 to 2015. So the amount of air pollution has decreased. It's gone from about 125 micrograms per meter cubed all the way down to a low of well below 70 micrograms per meter cubed. However, in 2016 there was a small increase, and that's because industrial production increased, and that means that they started making more things. But overall, in Beijing, the amount of air pollution has decreased. And this is a pattern that we see across China. However, there are some areas where air pollution has remained the same, and not all areas of China have seen this rapid decrease. But on the whole, there has been a decrease in air pollution. Just for context, Beijing is located north of Shenzhen. Shenzhen is the city that we studied earlier. Now we're going to do a piece of reading to think more about how the government tackled air pollution and why they were able to do that. The Chinese government's response to air pollution. According to the World Bank, in 2016, 16 of the world's most polluted cities were located in China. Today, China is an example for cities looking to reduce air pollution. So, how did China go from being criticised as an environmental disaster to a success story? In 2013, the Chinese government implemented strict regulations on air pollution by shutting down many coal power plants, enabling the public to report big polluters to the government using an app, and investing in renewable energy. In just 4 years, the government has managed to reduce particulate pollution by 36%. The rate of change is unprecedented. That means no one's ever seen it before. In just 3 months, the government built more solar panels than France built in 7 years. However, the environmental regulations come with negative economic impacts. Thousands of manufacturing companies have been forced to close for producing too much air pollution, and millions of businesses now pay more tax to the government to pay for environmental regulations. But China can afford these costs because most people are now employed in the tertiary sector, not in manufacturing. That's surprising, isn't it? We've just talked about China with manufacturing. Let me read that bit again. But China can afford these costs because most people are now employed in the tertiary sector, not in manufacturing. So today, more people work in services in China than in manufacturing. In 2016, the tertiary sector was responsible for more economic growth in China than the secondary sector. The rate at which Chinese consumption has grown is also hard to imagine. Just a decade ago, most urban Chinese had enough money to cover basic needs like food, clothes, and housing. Today, half are living in relatively well-to-do households. Annual disposable incomes of 140,000 renminbi to 300,000 renminbi, where they have disposable income for regular meals out, beauty products, flat screen TVs, and holiday travel. These days, the incomes of Chinese factory workers are only 4% lower than factory workers in the US, and 60% of secondary school students go on to university. There is a growing quaternary sector because Chinese companies' ability to copy other businesses, along with a highly educated workforce, has enabled them to move quickly from producing basic goods to high-tech goods. However, 4 decades of the fastest economic growth the world has seen has turned China into the world's biggest polluter, and China will still be depending on coal for years to come, despite changes to its economy. In 2019, China's coal consumption increased. The provinces of Shanxi, and Zhejiang, excuse my pronunciation, it's very bad, which have expanded the coal industry and have made the least progress in reducing air pollution since 2015. Right, let's go through some of the key points in this article then. So, in 2013, the Chinese government brought in regulations, that means rules, to reduce the amount of air pollution. And they managed to reduce the amount of air pollution by 36%, which is a massive change that no one has ever managed to do before. But protecting the environment came with negative economic costs because companies had to close and businesses had to pay more tax to the Chinese government. And that's a dangerous game because one of the reasons that businesses are attracted to China is because they don't have to pay very high taxes. But China can now afford to increase the taxes businesses pay to the government because they're less reliant on manufacturing. Let's pick that apart a bit. Before 2013, most of China's wealth was coming from manufacturing. Now, most of China's wealth comes from the service sector, also known as a tertiary sector. That's things like shopping, like holidays, banking, finance, law. So they can now have negative impacts on manufacturing without negatively impacting the wealth of China as a whole. Today, China is very definitely an NEE and at the higher end of being an NEE. Most of the population go to university, they're very highly educated, and the amazing thing is that the amount that they're paid in factories is only 4% lower than factory workers in the USA, and the USA is a HIC. So China now has China's level of development has now really rapidly improved. But as we saw from the graph earlier, the majority of China's energy still comes from coal, and despite changes to the economy and environmental regulations, rules about the environment, China is continuing to have problems with air pollution, but it's not as bad as it was before 2013. And it's better in some places than it is in others. Read through the flow diagrams, which take you through the successes of the Chinese government's attempts to manage air pollution. Tell your screen what the missing boxes are. Pause the video while you do that. Okay, so some of the successes are that they've decreased air pollution. They've done that by 36%. So there's going to be fewer health problems, healthier people will take less time off work, and that will enable the economy to continue growing because people are going into work and they're making goods and they're producing services. Also, the growth of the tertiary sector means that when they did close factories, not that many people lost their jobs, and people who lost their jobs could find work in the tertiary sector. So the environmental regulations only had a small economic impact, and so China's economy continued to grow. However, there were some limitations, so some things that weren't that great about the Chinese government's plan to manage air pollution. What's missing from these flow diagrams? Pause the video and tell your screen. Okay, so in some provinces, air pollution has not decreased as fast, so there's continued health problems. They did have to close some factories, which means some people have lost their jobs, they've lost their incomes, and they may have to move back to rural areas. So we can see that China is following Clark and Fisher's model. It's industrialised and the amount of people working in the secondary sector has increased, and now it's moving into the post-industrial era as the amount of people in the tertiary sector increases. Now you're going to complete the quiz that is linked in the description below.